25 years ago, a black trans woman named Rita Hester was stabbed to death in her Boston apartment. Her murderer was never found, and friends and family questioned whether police were really committed to solving this case, all of which sparked citywide protests and ultimately led to the creation of the Trans Day of Remembrance. Now, on the anniversary of her death, Boston police reaffirmed their commitment to solving Rita Hester's case, which was recently assigned a new detective. But as local trans activist Chastity Bowick told GBH News, there is a lot of mistrust of police among the trans community.
Thank God it's open again, but just an open case, are they going to do the work?
I'm joined now by Tori Bedford, who's been covering this story for GBH News with Kate Sosin, LGBTQ plus reporter for the 19th News. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
So, so Tori, I mean, I know that you've been reporting on this for some time. Talk to me a little bit about Chastity's story. I know she couldn't be here with us tonight.
Yeah, so unfortunately Chastity couldn't join us, but, you know, she's a source, longest resume, you know, of the work that she's done with different kinds of trans advocacy and mentorship. And I think, you know, she, to us, kind of stood out as kind of the main character of this. There, obviously, you know, we're looking at Rita, and we're working at the same time on this video that's I think coming out next week, where we're kind of looking at the parallel of their lives. You know, they both had these challenges, had to engage in survival sex work, had, you know, just were treated and mistreated by the public and by the media and by the police. And Chastity is now just such a representative, such a great representative for the community, and has gone on to be, you know, lead these huge organizations. And I think when she looks back at her life and her journey, it's sort of, you know, what Rita would have perhaps wanted to do had she survived. Rita was a huge personality. She was very active and vocal, you know, back in the 90s. You know, she died in 98 for this community. And I think that, you know, her life was just taken too soon and very tragically, in the way that it's representative of so many deaths, right? Like, so many members of the trans community die from violence. And I think that the renewal to this case and to solving it offers a glimmer of hope. It offers something to say, like, hey, you know, we're paying attention to this and we care, and this is important to us, when, you know, hundreds of thousands of cases across the world are never given the time of day.
Yeah. And Kate, I imagine, you know, you hear these stories, you report on these stories, obviously. What does having a police department like the Boston Police Department reopen this case to make sure that they continue to, I guess, effort to find this murderer?
You know, I think it means a lot, and it means a lot to two different communities. One is Rita's immediate community. Her family had long lost hope. Her sister, Diana, and Diana's kids and extended family had stopped calling. They had become exhausted, and so this celebration of Transgender Day of Remembrance had been meaningful, but it had also been painful for them. And then the larger transgender community, of which I'm a part, it really says something when this murder that inspired this international movement of Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is an annual vigil that honors homicide victims, when the person that inspired that murder had never been solved. It really felt like it was a point of real pain, and it continues to be, that initial murder has never been solved, that we don't know what happened to her. If that one can't be solved, whose murder will be solved, right? It always felt like an injustice for the whole community.
And that tension, as you know, Chastity mentioned, between the police and the trans community continues to exist and be there.
It does, and I want to note, you know, I don't think that this was done for a point of malice, but there continues to be a cultural incompetency. So when we got the statement from police, Rita's dead name, which was the male name she was assigned at birth, was in the statement, right? And so there's things that police have to do and learn in order to work with the trans community so that those communities can come together and solve this case. And there's healing that needs to happen in order for them to move forward.
Well, in Chastity's own words, we actually do have a sound bite where she is talking about the first time she heard about Rita Hester's story and the ongoing violence against trans people.
We're mourning all of these lives that were taken of people who identify like me. So for me, it was really scary. It was eye-opening. It made me realize the type of precaution I have to take when going outside and leaving my house and type of events that I go to, because I realized that my life is not of value to a lot of people.
Yeah, and Tori, you know, we also know statistically if you are a black trans person, the rates of homicide for those folks are even higher. And Chastity talking about her safety here, you know, really, I think hits the nail on the head there, brings us home.
Yeah, I think they were reading the names, you know, from across the world this year of trans people lost to violence, and I think there were 340 names, and that's just what has been reported. It's still underreported, right? We spoke to this researcher, Brendan Lance, who works out of this think tank at the University of Florida, and he has preliminary data where they're showing the disparity in clearance rates, so how they solve the crimes, and whether or not police, you know, are able to solve the crimes. There's a lot of disparity there in demographic groups, huge demographic disparities. Black trans women, their cases are far less likely to be solved. And he wanted to kind of look at what impacts that. And one of the things that he connects in this preliminary data is whether or not police in their initial reporting, or, you know, in Rita's case, it was their initial reporting and current day reporting, whether or not police dead name or misgender the victim. And that shows kind of a cultural issue within the department, but it also shows a lack of you know, putting the work in to know the details. The disparity that he found from 10 years, looking at 10 years of data from the clearance rates, is that the national clearance rate from 2010 to 2021, so 11 years, was, I think, of just about 62%. And when you just limit that to trans people, it's 48%. So there's a huge drop, right? And so he has this research preliminarily where it's just looking at what makes someone a victim in the eyes of society and the eyes of police, and if they're not a true victim, right, or their case isn't worth solving, like what makes someone case worth solving, and there's just a huge gap there for these cases.
Yeah, and Kate, you know, as we talk about the data that's out there, is there a willingness to have police departments train or retrain in your experience?
That's a very good question. You know, a lot has changed in the 25 years since Rita was murdered. And there is growing cultural competency, but obviously we're not there yet. And transgender homicides have only increased, we've seen. And part of that, of course, is that more people report trans homicides. We're more aware of transgender people, but also the vitriol against trans people has also increased. We've seen more than 500 anti-transgender bills introduced into state legislatures over the last 3 years. And that has impacted the way that trans people go about living their lives. And it has also impacted violence against transgender people, particularly Black transgender women, women of color living in cities. And so it's very hard to say that things have gotten better, particularly in law enforcement, when we continue to see things like dead naming, when these murders happen and cases are not solved, and those numbers remain so high. So is the feeling different about safety for trans people? It's really hard to say. I don't know that it is.
Yeah. You know, Chastity, in her own words, talked about living on borrowed time and protecting herself, and so we want to hear from her again.
At 38, I feel like I'm living on borrowed time. Like I'm not supposed to be here. And so I have to be myself authentically every day regardless of what anyone has to say about me. But I also have to make sure I protect myself, because there's really no way to live. Who wants to wake up every day and wonder if they're going to make it back home just because of who they are?
Tori, just incredible, that soundbite there. You know, talk to me a little bit about, you know, when we gathered that sound, but also the meaning behind it there.
Yes, we were speaking at the Trans Day of Remembrance event, which Chastity organized. I think there's something that everybody that I spoke to about Rita throughout the reporting of this story, and Kate knows this, they've been reporting on Rita for years. There's something so radical and unfortunately provocative to people about trans joy or just existing, right? And when we spoke to Chastity, she was saying she'll say, "What do you want from me? What does society want from us?" Right? Like, if I perform myself in this way or that way, will I be in less danger? Because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about people's lives and dying by violent means. But there's something so radical about living out loud and about being yourself in the face of so much hate and just this world that doesn't accept you and makes you feel like you should be silenced or that you should not exist just for being yourself. So trans joy in the face of that is a radical political act, and that should be celebrated, but at the same time, nobody should have to do that. Like, people just want to live their lives. And Rita just wanted to live her life, and she did, and she lived so loudly, and she was just expressing herself, and she would perform, and she had just had this extremely big and joyous personality, and she was a friend to so many people. And I think, you know, it's just the framing, when we look at, you know, these murders and the way that people are violently killed, there is a framing that implies that people deserved it just for being who they are. I think that is current day. You know, we talk about, it's really hard to say, have things gotten better? Is there more acceptance? Current day, there's just so much vitriol and hate and violence in the face of trans existence, not even trans joy. I'm
even thoughtful of the language, like in trying to educate folks on the language for this community, for folks, even pronouns, even the term dead naming, like things like that. It seems like that ends up being a barrier to even compassion, which it shouldn't be.
Well, it's a question of, do you validate someone's existence? And I think as a reporter, sometimes we're asked to create false equivalencies, or we're asked to say, like, well, they say this and they say that, but ultimately we're talking about, do we validate, you know, in the process of reporting this story, several people have misgendered Kate, and it's just something that they have to deal with all the time on a day-to-day basis. And I think each time it's a little chip. I can't speak. You can speak more to it, but
yeah.
You know, I want to point out something about Transgender Day of Remembrance that I think is really important, which is that it's become this international day. It's very important for the transgender community. But I met a young person actually in Boston a couple of years ago working on the Yes on 3 campaign, which was about should Massachusetts keep non-discrimination protections.
Right.
And that young person said, the first thing that I learned about being trans was Transgender Day of Remembrance. It was about this community funeral. And I thought I would be dead by 24. And that struck me because that was the first time I really sat in transgender community. And I think it's the first time a lot of trans people find their community.
Right.
And there's been an effort to create other events, you know, Trans Week of Awareness and visibility, so that that's not the only thing that trans people have, but that's the way that a lot of trans people have come to find community and enter it, is through this sort of funeral. And we're trying to create other stories and other narratives. Yeah. And I think it's really important because Rita did have a very joyful life. Her family accepted her, embraced her, and loved her. And that young person found community by organizing later. But I think it's like really important to think about, what does it mean that our trans young people are growing up thinking that they have an expiration date, and how do we change that?
Yeah, very well said. Thank you so much, Tori and Kate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.